Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Lillian Halpin from the Professional Accountancy team of Chartered Accountants Ireland. On behalf of ourselves in the Institute and our members and the other accountancy bodies, the ACCA, the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants and the Association of International Accountants, we'd like to thank the FIU and the Revenue Commissioners for their time this morning in presenting to us on this important topic to accountants of suspicious transaction reporting and how to make a suspicious transaction report. It's great to see the interest in the topic. There are over 900 people registered for the webinar, and I can see from the participants coming in that there's 400 on the call at the moment. So great to see that. Before we start, I refer you to our usual legal disclaimer, which is the next slide. Thank you. The content of the webinar, the presentations, the notes and the slides are general and they don't constitute advice or a definitive legal interpretation. So we'd ask you to get further advice if necessary if you're dealing with a specific issue in the area. So today, as I said, we have representatives from the Financial Intelligence Unit of Garda Siochana, and we have the revenue. From GoAML, we have Sergeant Stephen Coleman and Sergeant Caroline Breslin. And from revenue, we have Robbie Moore, who's assistant principal and head of the suspicious transaction unit, and he's going to make the presentation. And his two colleagues, Niamh O'Grady, manager, and Tony Grant, a team leader in the suspicious transactions unit, will be panelists and will help with the questions. So if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll hopefully get to some questions later. So and yes, just to mention that the slides will be available after the webinar is finished. So thanks. So now I will hand over to Stephen.
Thanks very much, Lillian. I think we're just have a presentation to go through first, and then we work on questions and that afterwards. So I think Caroline's just going to run through the presentation quickly. For anyone that has questions, if you just put them in the chat as we go along, and it is a chance to answer kind of practical questions as much as anything. So try and take the time to get as much out of it as you can. And myself and Caroline are here to try and do that. So we've tried to make it as practical as possible. But as we go through it, don't be afraid to ask the questions, and hopefully we have enough time to get through them all.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm one of the detective sergeants here in FIU. I'll just start going through our presentation. So our topics in the presentation, we're just going to talk about the role of the Financial Intelligence Unit, suspicious transaction reports and STR analysis. FIU Ireland, it's divided into 3 units. So myself and Detective Sergeant Grania Reynolds, we look after kind of the day-to-day running of the FIU. So we would be there with the process and analysing of the STRs kind of on a daily basis, just running. We've a team of 5 each under us. Then Stephen, he's in charge of the International Relations and Policy Unit, and I'm sure he'll discuss that for us now in a while. And then we have the Terrorist Financing Intelligence Unit, and that is run by Detective Sergeant Brian Lavelle. And he has another Garda member that works along with him, and Stephen does as well. So we're a police-based FIU. Our primary function is to receive and assess suspicious transaction reports from designated persons and competent authorities. So like supervisory bodies such as central bank, law societies. So the FIU staff, even though we're obviously members of Garda Siochana, we also have FIU powers. We're a standalone unit. And we put in a statutory footing in 2008 with the enactment of the Criminal Justice Money Laundering Terrorist Financing Act. FIU staff means those members of Garda Siochana are members of, we have like civilian staff, which are called Garda staff, and they are appointed by the Garda Commissioner. So you get appointed as an FIU officer. We use specialized software, GoAML. We actually just had an upgrade on Monday. So it's going, I don't know how it's going. We're with a few teething problems, but it's we've been looking for the upgrade for a while now, so it's good for us. We're hoping that's going to help us to kind of analyze our SDRs and just make our life a little bit easier, and I suppose make our analysis better of those SDRs. SDR reporting in Ireland is subjective, so there's no mandatory monetary thresholds required by designated persons to submit a report. So if if somebody is submitting a report, it has what they base it on. And we also don't operate a consent regime. Some countries or some FIUs do, but we don't operate that. So FIU is obliged to conduct operational and strategic analysis on SDR. So when an SDR is submitted, it's linked, a person's linked. It can be, sometimes this has to be done manually. Accounts are linked, entities are linked, and identify transactional flows. I suppose we identify trends, typologies, and provide accurate and up-to-date statistics for FIU annual reports, FATA, FIU Commission, etc. A member of Garda Siochana is a member of FIU Ireland for the purposes of preventing, detecting, investigating, or combating money laundering or terrorist financing, may make a request in writing for any financial, administrative, or law enforcement information that FIU Ireland requires to carry out its functions from any of the following: a designated person, a competent party, the Revenue Commissioners, the Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection. So all SDRs are subject to preliminary analysis. So this is done by our Garda staff member. They actually process our SDR, so they're the ones that'll kind of accept or reject it. So a number of rejection things is that there's no entity reference number, some information's missing. We're really trying to, I suppose, improve the quality of the SDRs we're receiving at the minute. We're trying to do a bit of a piece along with the upgrade. So as I said, we've had a lot of changeover in staff in the last 12-18 months. So a lot of our Garda staff are newer members. So as I said, we're all working on trying to move towards getting a better quality of SDR for the benefit, I suppose, of yourselves and ourselves. So that's something, if you have any issues with anything being rejected or anything like that, please reach out to us on the message board, and we're happy to engage with people in relation to that sort of stuff. So basically, if an SDR is received, it's processed, and then it's assigned to one of the detective guards in FIU, TFIU, and they provide further analysis on it. So they carry out some checks on our systems, and if they believe from carrying out those checks that there's enough information that this is something that needs to be disseminated, it'll be disseminated to either trained detective sergeants in divisions for consideration, reinvestigation, or we have in-house money laundering teams within GNECB, and then other Garda national units such as SCU in relation to terrorist financing related ones, the Criminal Assets Bureau, and again where we sit within, which is the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau. So I'll hand you over to Stephen for this bit.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Yeah, as Caroline said, I look after the International Relations and Policy Unit. But just to caveat that, we're a very small FIU, so we do tend to do a bit of everything. Like if Caroline's not there, I look after her stuff and she looks after my stuff. So if you reach out to the FIU, any of the detective sergeants will be able to do the others kind of role, because by European standards and worldwide, really, we are very, very small FIU. So the role of the International Relations and Policy Unit. Obviously, money laundering and terrorist finance is cross-jurisdictional nature, and we have to share intelligence. So we have obligations to share STRs with other countries, and that's one part of the role that I do. So most STRs do have an international link, that might be inward or outward international transfers, non-Irish nationals sending or receiving funds, or it could just be a nexus to another country. And specifically within the EU, we have specific obligations to share that information. And it's to do with the passporting of services. In Ireland, we have a huge amount of, in the last 3 or 4 years, and you'll see the numbers in a little while, we have a huge amount of fintech industries, crypto, e-monies, payment institutions, and they operate on a passporting of service basis, which means that they're regulated here, but they operate a passporting of services throughout the EU, and they have customers all throughout the EU. So for their reporting purposes, they report everything to us, and we are responsible then to disseminate it to that EU country. We basically act like a post box. So, for example, if it was a an e-money institution and they're regulated here, but their customer is in Italy and the customer is transacted with somebody else in Spain, their obligations are that they have to report that to FIU Ireland. Now, neither of those customers have any nexus to Ireland, so they submit a different report type, which is called an STR-EU, and we are then responsible as FIU Ireland to disseminate that STR to Italy and Spain. And we have a legal obligation to do that. We have to do it without changing the information involved, and we have to do it as quickly as possible. So to do that, we've established 2 different report types. So they're all the figures we will give you are all STRs. They're all suspicious transaction reports, but we allow people that are operating under a passporting of services to submit what's called an STR-EU. So anywhere you see STR-EU or that number mentioned, that's all that means, is it's a report where we've had to disseminate it to another country. Now, that's not just the only way we would do that. So if you, for example, had a customer who was operating here and doing business with the UK, say, obviously since Brexit, we wouldn't use STR-EUs. We would still send information that we thought was pertinent to the UK, for example. So say you send in an STR, your client should do the books, and there's something there in relation to the UK that's just not right, or there's a person involved they're doing business with in the UK. If you have that information and you think it's suspicious, you can still report it through FIU Ireland, and then we send it to the UK. You know, the difference between an STR-EU and that is we have to do some sort of analysis on that. So we would look at that STR, we would process it like a normal STR, we would review it, and we might look at the Irish-based customers and say, okay, we're actually doing that, that's our job, and we might not send it directly to the UK until we're finished with our analysis. Or we could reach out to the UK and say, look, do you have anything on this person? Are they subject of an investigation over there, or do you have any intelligence on them? So we would still share information, it's just how we share it and the amount of analysis we do. So the reason it was kind of established was to do with that, I call it the ERPU, our superintendent doesn't like when I shorten it like that, but it's the easiest way to say it. So there are more and more obligations on FIUs throughout Europe with the new money laundering package and AMLA coming in. There's a huge emphasis on information sharing and being able to access information across the union, but also worldwide. When we look at the FATF recommendations, information sharing is key. So the ERPU was set up kind of to help facilitate that. Our primary focus is to respond to requests for information before FIUs received. FIU.net is basically an EU-wide messaging service, so we're allowed to share a lot more information with EU FIUs. And then Egmont Secure Web just means anyone outside that, it's the secure messaging service we have to use to share information with other FIUs. So we share information with all FIUs throughout the world. How much we share with them changes between the EU and the rest of the world, but it's still a huge amount of information sharing. We can also check databases, FIU databases, central registers, and requests to Irish entities on their behalf using domestic powers. So what that means is, if another FIU comes in and asks us to check central register of bank accounts, we can check them. And where we're moving towards is shared registers throughout the EU. So we will be able to check and see if an EU national has a bank account anywhere in the EU. That's going to be 3 or 4 years away, probably 4 more likely. But that is a stipulation of the new money laundering directives and recommendations is to basically say that we have to be able to access that. So a huge amount of information and intelligence available to the FIU that we and obligations are placed on us to do that. So if we do that analysis, as I'll explain, it comes into us, we will basically be ready to send it on to the next country to either help with our analysis, or if we feel it's more important for them. So if your customer, the suspicion on your side was all based on somebody outside the jurisdiction, we would have a quick look at maybe the person, the subject to the STR, the Irish nexus, but then we would very quickly go, okay, it's not here. And it's very important to note the reason we do that is there's a massive onus on us to protect the information, and Caroline will cover this, but there's a huge onus on us to protect STR information. It's not crime reports. It doesn't go to the guards if we don't deem it absolutely necessary. So one of our main roles in FIU is the protection of STR information from all other kind of law enforcement unless we deem it necessary. So that's why the difference between STR and STR-EU is important, because we could get an STR and we might think there's not enough in that, we're not going to disclose it unless we can link it to criminality and we feel it's reached a significant analysis threshold, we might never send it out. And that's to protect the people making the STRs, is to protect the person that is the STR. And there's very valid reasons for that we can talk about. But I guarantee you, there's that many people on this call. There are people who are subjects of SDRs on this call, and that can happen. And it's our job to protect that information from law enforcement. So, if you want to jump on there, take up again, Caroline.
So we also have the Terrorist Financing Intelligence Unit. This was established in 2017. So basically, they focus on analysing and disseminating SDRs that are suspected to be linked with domestic, international terrorism and terrorist financing. So whenever SDRs are submitted, we actually filter. So that'll be like keywords and stuff like that. So that's how this is something that's highlighted. Maybe it's related to terrorist financing. So these are assigned then to our Terrorist Financing Intelligence Unit, and they're analysed there. Now, all these ones that might be highlighted by this filter might not be related to terrorist financing. It might be something else that's come up in the keyword that might have triggered it. So basically, that's where that comes from. So these are obviously analysed. Again, the same thing. Queries are carried out on our pulse system, the GoAML on our Garda pulse system, and other checks are carried out. And then if it's deemed that this needs to be disseminated, then this will be forwarded to the Special Detective Unit who deal with that sort of stuff. So approximately 8% of SDRs submitted in 2024 had TF links. That doesn't mean that they were all disseminated. That doesn't mean that that they were all disseminated. It's just 8% in 2024. Basically, if there's no terrorist financing link after some analysis carried out by the Terrorist Financing Intelligence Unit, then sent back to kind of the regular FIU, and they will take it up from there. They'll analyse it, they'll process it, they'll do the checks on it. So again, Terrorist Financing Intelligence Unit, and the same as the FIU, we're not investigative units. We carry out preliminary analysis and see that if this is something that warrants further investigation. And again, it's the ones in relation to terrorist financing, they're forwarded to special detective units, as they have the national remit for the investigating of domestic and international terrorist and terrorist financing. Terrorist financing also work closely with Security and Intelligence and SDU. And again, they disseminate any SDR related information primarily to these two areas in Garda Siochana. They also deal with any inquiries received from SDU, SNI, from members of Garda Siochana that have something in relation to terrorist financing. Anything related to that goes to them. So, training outreach, we would do some training sessions. We do a lot of meetings. We engage with competent authorities and supervisory bodies. We are happy for people to reach out to us if they want. Like today, we're happy to do this type of presentation, and hopefully everyone gets something from it. We also are contactable via the GoAML message board. I'm sure everybody here is registered in GoAML, so they'll be all submitted in our SDRs, and they are able to reach out to us on our secure message board if they have any questions in relation to an SDR they've submitted, whether there's been a rejection, whether they're unsure of submitting an SDR. Again, we're not a competent authority, so we can't tell you what to do, but we can provide advice, or we can advise you to go speak to your competent authority. If there's something urgent, like you submitted an SDR and you're like, this needs to be looked at urgently, again, reach out to us on the message board or via the FIU mailbox, and we're happy to to prioritize that if it's something that's there. Again, we send out bulletins, and I think what's the new one's called a broadcast, is it, on the new system? And we can send these out now, like via the message board. So say if it's something that's come up, like say like somebody's using 4 documents and opening accounts, so maybe one that was recently in a number of credit unions and then applying for loans, then this is something that we can reach out to the credit unions and we can let them know that to keep an eye out for this. Sometimes it can be to very specific area, And again, we send out bulletins on trends and stuff like that as well. We're currently reviewing how we can provide more quality feedback on SDRs. I'd say getting more people in, that might help. But we do scramble a bit. There's only, as Stephen said, there's only a very small amount of us, and we all kind of help each other out. We also sit in the Anti-Money Laundering Steering Committee, chaired by the Department of Finance and other stakeholders, and discuss money laundering, terrorist financing trends and risks policies and FATF related matters, etc. And we currently participate in 3 working subgroups. Bi-monthly meetings are held with revenue commissioners to discuss SDR related issues and comparisons of SDRs received and equality. There's also a number of public-private partnerships. We have the domestic banks, international banks, joint practices group with the accountancy bodies, FinTech's Intelligence Task Force, and the Joint Intelligence Group Stockbrokers hasn't been established yet, and also part of Europol, Financial Intelligence Public-Private Partnership, EFIP. And that's just more kind of committees, standing meetings, forum, subgroups that we're part of. Okay, so we're just going to go into a few figures. So this is the number of SDRs reported from 2013 to 2024. Obviously, you can see there's a huge increase in 2023. This is just in relation to an entity that didn't believe that they had to report here in Ireland. And then they kind of did a backlog and nearly sent us over the edge with the amount of SDRs that were submitted. I'd only just joined FIU in the middle of that year. It was a baptism of fire. Still don't think I've caught up myself, to be honest, but we'll get there. And this is the number of SDREUs. SDREUs only came in, and we're kind of saying yesterday, you think it's the middle of 2021, that's why the figure is so low. But as you can see, as Stephen was saying, there's relation to the fintech and stuff, there's huge amounts now being submitted into FIU Ireland. And there is Stephen and one other person that are dealing with them, so they are pretty busy. Number of SDRs submitted by accountants. So there's 3 so far this year. That's quite good. So again, obviously I'd be talking to Lillian and stuff at the meetings, and in 2024 it was 30. So obviously that's twice as many as 2023. So I think that's huge. Like it is I suppose that we're just trying to get it out there that, you know, that people need to be reporting. I know there's a lot of obligations to report. You have a lot of different obligations. It's not just reports to us. I know obviously then there's dual reporting to revenue and everything, and I understand I didn't understand the amount of different I suppose responsibilities that were there until it was shared with me. There's I don't know 6 or 7 obligations to report under different sections. So we see there 2021 obviously 33, which is obviously quite a good number. And then there was a huge drop off in 2022. I don't know if something happened in that interim, if there was advice given or why, but we're starting to see the numbers come back up again, so that's good. And again, if you've ever any query about submitting an SDR, we're happy. Just reach out to us. So we'll go in here now. What is an SDR? So it's a report forwarded by a designated person in relation to unusual or suspicious transactions carried out on their customers' clients that's suspected to be money laundering or terrorist financing. Again, as Stephen said earlier, an SDR is not a report of a crime, and we do really treat it like with kids' gloves. It is like kept close to our heart. We, I suppose, even though we're based within Garda Siochana, like we are separate, and we do make that very clear to kind of those within G needs to be. if they're requesting information for us, it's the same as any other guard within the country. It has to be done via a proper form or procedure. They have to provide the correct information. We're very, very rigid over that. An SDR will include personal details of the person making the transaction, their name, address, nationality, telephone number, occupation, source of wealth if it's been asked, details of identification documents produced, photographs, proof of address, etc. Nature of the business relationship. Is it a personal account? Is it a business account? What type of transactions are expected? I suppose the more information provided in an SDR, it really does help. It gives us a better picture of what type of person we're looking at here. Like their wages, are they receiving social welfare? And then there's these huge red flags then with money coming in and out then outside these normal things. This type of information is so important when, initially, well, that's what we're seeing initially. That's what we're kind of getting a clear picture in our head prior to doing any checks or anything like that. And again, one SDR and an individual might be like, there's not enough here. But if we've received SDRs from a couple of different people or from the same entity in relation to this person, when you put it all together, it might be that's where we say, all right, this is something now that we believe might need further investigation by the guards, So, I suppose that's something to think about when you're kind of hemming and hawing whether to submit an SDR. Oh, I don't think so. I suppose, again, it's subjective, it's up to you, but I suppose it's something to think about. It might be the final piece of a puzzle that pushes that to the next level. So yes, things like normal day-to-day expenditure, phone top-ups, ATM activity, transactions where a person is or where a bank card is used. Is somebody gambling, receiving funds from other person? All this assists in building up the profile of a person, and kind of and linking them, I suppose, to if there's a money laundering investigation that needs to happen or not. Again, it should specify, an SDR should specify what triggered the suspicion. Like, did they make a large cash lodgement? Were they asked, did they make some sort of a silly remark? I suppose this is more for financial institutions, like where, what was the source of the cash? Another one is multiple cash lodgements being made at various locations countrywide. So, maybe a transaction in Dublin, a transaction in Galway, but all at the same time, it can still be, the same person. What happened to these funds, international transfers and stuff like that. Other thing that's been more so, I suppose, in relation to terrorist financing, funds sent by an agent to a high-risk destination, and what was the purpose of the transaction? Did the customer buy a car or expensive jewelry using more than 10,000 euro in cash? So high-value good dealers must apply customer due diligence to all transactions that are over 10,000 or more in a single transaction. So all information on SDRs are inputted and they're matched against the FIU database for previous hits. So they're meant to kind of link up, say if somebody's already had a previous SDR in them, they're meant to link that up. If this doesn't happen, this can be manually done by our Garda staff would do that. So they'll be able to see, have we received any previous SDRs on this person? Has a Garda inquiry been received on this person before? Or has an inquiry received from another jurisdiction in the past? So again, that builds up. If you're seeing, right, say France has made an inquiry, there's, a Garda member has made a request for information in relation to that person, you're seeing a couple of things already. That might be like, right, there's something going on here. I suppose, a profile's built up of them, links with other people, financial transactions, flights, stuff like that. Just their financial footprint. Again, we'll say it again. The contents of STRs is very confidential. This source of information needs to be protected, and a report of an unusual transaction may never be linked with criminal conduct. You know, there's, as I said, Stephen said it already, there's probably an STR on some of us here. Could be me. I haven't ever checked. I don't know, I'm too nervous. But look, like STRs can be submitted sometimes, and you're like, it probably shouldn't be submitted. If at the time a question was asked, you know, what is this for, the source of funds, that sometimes can be where it would end it. You know, people forget, you know, things happen. And sometimes people are just nervous, I suppose, and, you know, maybe a lack of training and stuff like that. These things can happen. We're well aware of it. But I said, like, you know, something was brought up to me recently. I think there was a credit union conference of some sort, and at that, somebody said, oh, somebody's been summoned to court because they submitted an STR, and it was somebody up the country or something like that. It was kind of very thing. And then there was panic mode. I think MLROs were looking to be reassigned, because obviously if you're in a small area and you're in charge of that stuff, and, you know, everybody knows everybody, and you might be panic stricken if you submitted an STR and the next thing you were the one being called. That does not happen, or it should not happen. An STR, it might trigger the start of an investigation, but it is never mentioned after that. If court orders are got, it's on confidential information, and most judges are aware that they won't query it. But if it is, it'll be done in private. It won't be done. So, you know, that's just, I suppose, put people at ease on relation to that. I said every effort is made not to disclose the existence of an STR, and there is an offence for any person to make an unauthorized disclosure tipping off. So we actually use ISBAR, which is really, it's an amazing tool. It's utilized part of our analysis of an STR. It is a central register of all accounts, financial accounts held by people within the country. As Stephen was saying, there is going to be a kind of a European one. I think it's called Boris, is it? In 4 years' time. That would be amazing for us in relation to STR analysis. I suppose it would help us to identify things a bit quicker, instead of having to reach out via FIU.net. I don't know, are we doing questions now, or are we doing them after revenue? Lillian, if you want to jump in there.
Yes, thanks, Caroline and Stephen. That was great. No, I do see there's a couple of questions in the chat and also in the question and answer. So maybe if the team would have a look at those, and we can do them at the end. And just to say, just give Robbie a chance to put his slides up there next. But to say thanks to both of you. That's a great insight into your work. And
yeah,
I know that.
Sorry. Yeah, there is just one thing I wanted to quickly cover. The SCR numbers in general in these type of industry or sectors are normally generally low. The issue we have is that people like yourselves are gatekeepers, and you're gatekeepers to the financial institutions or financial services. And the problem is, if it gets through you, if money laundering gets through somebody like yourselves, if it gets to us some other way, or even as an investigator, if it comes through somebody like yourselves, it adds an air of legitimacy to that suspicion. So if your services are used or compliance isn't there, the problem as an investigator is when we see that, we think, well, it's come through an accredited accountancy body. Sure, it adds an air of legitimacy. So they will target, and sophisticated money laundering scams will always target proper entities like that to allow for that air of legitimacy to add to it. And that gatekeeper role is very important. And that's why it has to be kind of looked at, and people have to be aware of that. And if we look at how many we have registered in GoAML, we've 626 accountants register and GoAML, and we 56 auditors who have a dual role. So it could kind of be a little bit of crossover there. But if we look at the numbers on this call, you know, there's still a huge amount that probably aren't registered. And as Caroline said, Caroline made a great point in relation to the broadcast. If you never submit an STR, that's fine. But if you're not registered on GoAML and we send out an intelligence bulletin to say, look, this accountancy body has made us aware of this, and it's actually something we've noticed, and we might send out a bulletin. So if you're not on GoAML, you can't do it. So, you know, register on GoAML is massively important. Plus, if you're an accountant or you're anybody and your competent authority comes out to look at you, the first question they will ask is, are you registered on GoAML? So you definitely need to do that. And if you never submit an STR, you haven't lost anything, you will get an email every so often to say, if we send everything out like we're doing the upgrade, you'll get an email to say there's a message on the message board, but we'll just be keeping you up to date. So it is important to just remember those things. And yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact that gatekeepers, and we really do appreciate your knowledge in this area, because if you flag something with us, we might not understand it. We don't have the expertise you do, but when you flag it with us, we might uncover a new money laundering typology, or uncover a way people are using your system to abuse that and to get into the area of legitimacy I was talking about. And you might be the one that flags that with us. So it is really important, and we do appreciate the time. So
thanks. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I totally agree. And from ourselves, our own, from the Institute point of view, we do, and the other accountancy bodies do participate in the joint practices group. And that's a great way of, you know, sharing our information. But we do try, this is why we've been trying to hold this webinar to raise awareness. It's not just that you make a suspicious transaction report, but for our members and the members of the other bodies to know that you should register as well. Just register anyway, and then you're ready to go if there is a suspicious transaction, but also you do get that information. So yes, just endorse that, Stephen and Caroline, thanks. So we encourage people to register. And just to say that I'll cover it later in my own bits of slides, but there's some links that I can refer you to for practical registrations and so forth. So, okay, well, if Robbie is ready now to go, I can pass you over if that's okay, Robbie.
That's great, Lillian. Thanks a lot. Thanks to Caroline and Stephen as well for the presentation. Very informative. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robbie Moore. I'm the Assistant Principal of the Suspicious Transaction Unit in Revenue. I'm joined here today by my colleagues Niamh O'Grady and Tony Grant. Niamh is the manager of the Suspicious Transaction Unit, and Tony is a team leader and IT liaison. I'm going to go through a short presentation with you all today, and we'll be available for any questions you may have at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, if you think of after the webinar, feel free to contact us. The slides will be shared, and our contact details are on the second last slide, I think. So a few topics I'll cover today are the role of the STR unit, the reporting requirements for entities. I'll go into a bit of detail about what makes a good quality STR and what it is that Revenue do once an STR, with an STR once they receive it. Our primary role is to receive, process, and distribute STRs to Revenue teams for evaluation, to ensure they're matched correctly, and then we pass them out to the caseworkers for caseworking. We are also the contact point between the caseworker and the designated bodies. So if any caseworker had any follow-up questions in relation to the STR that came through us, we would contact yourselves directly. They would come back to us and we would contact yourselves directly. Many of you may be already familiar that this the legislation for STRs is provided for under the Criminal Justice, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act 2010 as amended. So that's the legislation that supports the STR reporting. Over recent years, there's been a large increase in the sources of STRs. So the number of designated bodies who are required to submit the STRs has also increased. In the early days, it was predominantly the banks and the credit unions that accounted for most of the STRs. But as you can see from the slide, we now have money transfer companies, virtual assets service providers, funds industry, insurance sector, investment firms, accountants and tax advisors, legal sector, dealers in high-value goods, stockbrokers, casinos, betting, now referred to as the gambling sector, art dealers, and letting agents. So what exactly is an STR? STRs play a pivotal role in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing, and the information on an STR can assist Revenue, CAB, and the Guards in their investigations. and they can result in the disruption of criminal and terrorist activities, the identification of tax evasion and custom and excise offences, and ultimately result in penalties, prosecution, and in some cases imprisonment. The requirement to report an STR is, as I mentioned earlier, provided for in the Criminal Justice, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act, and this requires a designated person to make the report as soon as is practical. So this means once you become aware of, form an opinion that there is something suspicious about a transaction, then you should be sending in your report to Revenue and the FIU. It is important to note that an STR is a source of intelligence. It is not evidence. That based on the information that you have to hand, it could look like a suspicious transaction. However, when we receive the report and look at that in the context of other information that we have on file, such as tax returns that may have been received, we may have additional information to show that the person may have received a gift, an inheritance, or maybe even a gain from an investment that explains the source of funds. It should also be noted that with STRs, unlike the Guards, Revenue often have a time delay in terms of when we can use an STR, because STRs are immediate. So it's a transaction that took place today that you will be reporting to us tomorrow. But from a revenue point of view, we may need to wait until that individual sends in a tax return for this year before we can make any further inquiries regarding that transaction. In Ireland, STRs are received by both the FIU and Revenue, where in most countries the tax authorities don't receive STRs. So we are pretty unique in that regards, and we work really closely with our colleagues in the FIU. We have bi-monthly meetings and would also be in regular contact in between these times if we need to discuss any STRs that have come in. STRs provide red flags for both criminal and revenue-led activity. So what they do is they can act as pointers in the direction of an individual or an entity that maybe up to this time hadn't come to our attention. And then obviously ourselves and the FIU are looking at STRs from different perspectives. Revenue is looking at it in the context of tax evasion, but also in relation to custom and excise fraud. So for example, alcohol and tobacco smuggling. So what you need to get started? Reporting entities must firstly be registered for ROS and have a digital certificate. You can then register for STR reporting using following steps. Select Manage Reporting Obligations on My Frequently Used Services screen. Click on Register for STR reporting. Input the registration date and the FIU number. That's your GoAML org ID. The status for STR reporting will change to In Request. Complete the sign in and submit process. It may take 2 to 3 days for this to be reflected in ROS. Create a new ROS, create a new ROS sub-user certificate for all MLROs for STR reporting. This can be done using the Administrative Services tab. Once you've successfully completed the e-registration process, you will then be able to file an STR online with Revenue. There are 2 ways to submit an STR online to Revenue through ROS. XML upload, where you can upload single or multiple STR returns in the XML format. To do this, you log into the FIU's GoAML system, input the details, and instead of printing off the form, you will get a generated XML file, which you can then directly upload onto Revenue's ROS system. Or you can log into Revenue's ROS system, complete the web form, and then upload the XML file to the GoAML system. It allows, it allows attachments to be saved with the STR when you get an online acknowledgement of the STR submitted. A few pointers. An agent cannot register a client for STR reporting. This must be carried out on the client's own ROS login by their ROS administrator. When registered for STR reporting, a subset can then be created for use by the MLRO, and the appropriate permissions given to this subset for STR reporting to Revenue. An agent TAIN link can then be created by the agent, and the agent is then able to use this subset and submit STRs on behalf of their client. Just to emphasize again, that dual reporting remains, and this is provided for in the legislation, that STRs have to be submitted to both Revenue and the FIU. So what makes a good quality STR? One thing that we would emphasize is quality over quantity. What we would prefer is a smaller number of really good STRs over a large number of STRs that are of no value, that we can't take any further action on because there isn't enough information in them. One of the things to note is that on the STR, when you're completing the form, there's a report indicator, such as money laundering, terrorist financing, fraud, etc. One of these indicators is also tax evasion, and we would ask, if possible, that if you suspect the case involves or may involve tax evasion, select that indicator, please. You can select multiple indicators, so this just ensures that tax evasion cases are being highlighted for our attention. All STRs that come into revenue are data matched. We try and link them to a customer profile, so identification is key. Ask yourself, are there sufficient details to identify the client or beneficial owner for entities? So provide name, full address, previous addresses if you have them, and date of birth. Ask yourself, are children added as signatories on minor accounts? Again, it's just as important to capture these details. Ask yourself, are parents, guardians added as signatories on younger children? Accounts we have seen, STRs, where the parents have been using the accounts of a minor to try and disguise or hold funds from a business or other activities, which they are trying to keep off our radar. So these accounts can be important. The reason for disclosure is critical. What was it about this transaction that caused you to feel there was a suspicious activity here? Specify the issue at hand. What we would like is the reason for the disclosure, if possible. If you could put your suspicion in the first couple of sentences rather than the middle or bottom of the report, it just makes it easier for our caseworkers to work through. So if at the beginning of the report you can specify what it is you find suspicious, it will be of great help to us. Do you know your customer? Have you sufficient customer due diligence? So what behavior is typical for the customer? Why is this transaction unusual? What about this particular transaction is jumping out at you for being different? Again, employment details. If the customer makes any statements in relation to their current employment, as it might differ from the records that we have for that individual, this could also be important. Source of funds. Where did this money come from? As much information as you can give us in relation to the source of funds or the source of wealth. So, for example, if there was a check lodgement, provide the issuing bank, account number, the amount, name, etc. If there's mention of a bank draft, again, if you can give us the name of who the draft is issued for and the purpose of the draft. So, for example, if it was issued to a car dealership for the purchase of a car, are all the suspicious transactions mentioned in the reason for suspicion included as individual transactions? Each one of these has to show up as an individual transaction. It's important for us, from a revenue point of view, in terms of being able to follow the money and link them to a tax return. Cash lodgements. Has the person been asked for the source of these funds if they're withdrawing or lodging large amounts of cash? Is it possible to include details of the recipients of the cash? We would get STRs where they would say 50,000 cash has been taken out in the last 6 months. And they would say they're getting an extension done. But unless we had the name of the builder, there's very little we can do with these STRs. Again, this is following the money. The STR should break down the cash lodgements by calendar year. Again, this comes back to having the individual transactions listed, because what we get in some STRs is a global figure for the person. For example, that they've lodged 100,000 in the period May to March. But again, as it's crossing over 2 tax years, we're unable to link it to return. So it's very important that each transaction is listed separately, because what we would do then is request the individual to provide us with bank accounts so that we can see transactions on the accounts and raise them with the taxpayer if required. Large debits. Do we know where the funds are, where the funds have gone to? If possible, include turnover for previous years. So if you're able to give us any turnover on the account, this gives us a good idea of the amount of money that's coming and going. So we'll be able to then look at it in the context of the returns and any other information that we have in relation to taxpayer or entity. Where the STR refers to a previous report, you only need to include the previous entity reference number. There's no need to re-include extracts of previous reports that were sent in, as we already have access to all that information. So how does revenue use STRs? As I said earlier, every STR that comes in is assessed by our automatic risk rating system. So the first thing that's done is they're automatically linked where possible to a customer profile and assigned a risk rating. They will then arrive into the STR unit where the caseworkers will eyeball all the reports to make sure they've been assigned to the correct person, or in some cases, they may not have been able to make a match. So what we do then is we look at the other data that may be contained within the report, such as a phone number, vehicle registration number. There could also be an old address that we could use and try to link them to a person or entity. So again, the more detail you can give us, the better. So what SDRs give us is a profile of a business or individual's activity that's not in keeping with their tax returns. So the money that's going through the account doesn't mirror what we would expect given the amount of income they're returning as revenue. Are they transferring proceeds of a legitimate business to evade tax? Have they set up multiple accounts, minor or business accounts, where they're putting business income and trying to evade tax? Criminality or links to criminal groups. Is there names of associates that will be on our radar for customs and excise fraud? Or financial links to businesses with high risk, such as missing trader fraud or Phoenix directors. So high quality STR can therefore support an existing case where we have an audit ongoing, can be really useful, as it can maybe pinpoint an account we were unaware of, or an additional income that's coming in. It can also support a new case. So there could be a case that wasn't on our radar until the STR came in. Suspicious activity. It can be, among others, accounts opened in children's names. While there's absolutely nothing wrong with having accounts in your children's names, it's the pattern of activity within these accounts that might create a suspicion. For example, there was a student account. You wouldn't expect to see a significant amount of money going through. There was lots of lodgements. And then when the STR came in, it brought to our attention, and we found that a business partner was using his friend's children's accounts to hold money on his business behalf, essentially hiding the money. Unusual or unexpected lodgements. So you may be used to seeing a certain pattern of activity in the account, and then all of a sudden there's a large lodgements going in and they're unable to explain to your satisfaction. Large cash lodgements that have no apparent source. Are they lodging for others or shadow economy activity? Deposits from a new source. Again, where is this money coming from? Why have they suddenly got a new source of money coming in? Have they purchased a property? Is it undeclared rental income? Lodging business funds to personal accounts. As I mentioned previously, holding money from legitimate business accounts in personal accounts. Statements made to you in person or unusual behavior. There was an STR that came in from an entity where an individual was making cash lodgements at the counter. And at the time they lodged it, they said they'd received a gift, but didn't want revenue to know about it. So this individual had obviously never heard of STRs when he made that statement. Short period accounts. Accounts that were open for a short period. There's a lot of activity and then they're suddenly closed. We'd have to question, what was the purpose of that? Why were these accounts being opened and closed so quickly? Are they hiding a behavior? Sales suppression? We saw a report where an individual was involved in selling machinery, but what was happening was he was getting commission for, say, every 10 items he sold. He would get the value of one item for free. So what he did was he lodged the commission to a separate account, so it never hit the books at all. So things like that. Turnover higher than expected. Is there more money going through the accounts than you would expect from that type of activity? Are there large VAT repayments with low account activity? We had a report of an account where the only activity on the account seemed to be VAT repayments from revenue. So the case officer in this case was very alert and contacted us to make sure it was brought to our immediate attention. And when we intend, then we're able to contact the guards and have the account frozen. Because of the vigilance of that MLRO, no money was lost, and we were able to stop payments before any money was taken out of that account. Credit turnover that doesn't match payments made to revenue. So huge amounts of money going through the accounts, but very little of that money being paid over to revenue. Money to and from a country of interest. Do they have business activity with countries that you may be suspicious of? Countries that are known to be involved in money laundering or tax evasion. So just looking for those countries of interest. Business loans. Have they repaid a business loan off early? And where did that money come from that allowed them to pay off that loan? So you may probably be familiar with all these types of suspicious activities. And once you know your customer, you will be able to know what to expect from them. So anything out of the ordinary, then you would know there might be something suspicious about it. As I said earlier, if anything comes to mind, we're always available for contact and queries, and any queries we have, we'll do our best to answer them as quick as possible. The slides will be shared, so you will have this information later. Our mailbox is suspicious transactions unit@revenue.ie. This is a monitored mailbox, and any queries or issues you may have in relation to STR reporting or submitting reports online, you can contact us there. We'll be more than happy to assist. You can also find further information on our website, www.revenue.ie. I'd just like to thank you all again today for attending, and I hope you got something out of the presentation. I'll hand you back to Lillian.
So thanks very much for that, Robbie. That's great information. Before we go to, I see there are some questions in the questions and answers and in the chat box, so we'll come to them shortly. Just to go back over a few points there on STRs, to say that the reason why do accountants have to make suspicious transaction reports, and it's because accountants are designated persons under the Criminal Justice Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act 2010. So if there is a suspicion by a designated person, then if there's a suspicion that somebody else has been involved in money laundering or terrorist financing, then the obligation to report arises. And just to briefly touch on what is a suspicion, and in that regard, I'd refer you to some material that we have. We have an anti-money laundering guidance document, technical release, AML 2019. I've given you a link to it. I've given you a link to it in the slide. I'll come back. Yeah, that's the right slide, Deirdre, thanks. So just to say that there's some, they go through suspicious transaction reporting and deals with what is a suspicion. We also have a joint practices group document that we produced with the FIU a couple of years ago, the accountancy bodies. And again, it's called a red flags document. And again, I've given you the link to it. I'll come to that in a minute. It includes 9 quite practical case studies of different scenarios that an advisor might come across. So if you have a read of those case studies, it's a useful narrative after each one, discussing potential issues that fall out of each case and discussing various reporting obligations which arise from each scenario. And then the revenue, those 2 slides there from Robbie on suspicious activity are very useful, I think, as well in dealing with suspicion. So then just coming to the next slide, Deirdre, please. Just moving on then to, I think it was Caroline mentioned all the reporting obligations on accountants, and indeed there are a number. So I've just done a little slide there with the various obligations, and as well as a transaction that might be suspicious under section and require a suspicious transaction report to be made could also be a reporting obligation under section 59 of the Criminal Justice Theft and Fraud Offences Act, where the auditor has come into possession of accounts or documents indicating theft or fraud or another offence. Then there's a reporting requirement to the Garda Siochana, and under section 19 of the Criminal Justice Act 2011, where the accountant has information which could help in preventing or apprehending or prosecuting or convicting an offence, then again an obligation to report to Garda Siochana. So there's a list of the reporting requirements. And then just moving on to the next slide, I've listed the resources from the FIU and the revenue. So they'll be available on the slides afterwards. And anything that I update from today, the new information today, I'll put it on our website, so that'll be available there. Moving on to the next slide, Dee, please. It's our own resources and those of the other accountancy bodies. As I mentioned, the technical release, which was updated in 2022 on anti-money laundering. Also the red flags material, which was the joint practices group document. We have anti-money laundering pages which are free at the front, so they're not behind a member wall, so you can look at them. And then finally to mention, it is an English website. The Consultative Committee of Accounting Bodies in the UK, they have some due diligence case studies which are more general on money laundering, so but useful to look at nonetheless. So I think that is all right. Oh yes, and then just the last slide there, just a link to our technical hub, where we have as I said, the information on money laundering and other information as well. So now we'll move to the questions and answers, if that's okay. So
Lillian, can I just jump in for a second?
yeah,
In relation
sure,
to,
sorry.
it's a very good point in relation to the reporting requirements. And just if you have made a report under 59 or 19, can you include that in the STR information? And the reason we say that is because when the STR process that Caroline was discussing goes through, when it is disseminated to law enforcement, the STR will disappear. It's like it never happened. It won't ever appear in a court file. It won't ever appear in an investigation. So if we know you've already reported the matter to the guards, we're very conscious of that, and we will file the STR to avoid confusion and to make sure we protect the STR. So if you filed for any other reason already and the STR is something you feel you have to do, you can reach out to us and ask that if we want it. But if you do, just the first line even say this has been submitted under section 19 or section 59 or whatever it is, and then that will affect how we do our analysis and who we disseminate that report to.
That's great. Great point. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you. So will I go to the questions now? Yeah. So the first one was an interesting one, I thought there, from somebody. Are STRs subject to freedom of information or other similar requests?
No, it always comes up. No, they're not. So your GDPR obligations are in line with the law enforcement, basically, and processing of that data for the lawful purpose of compliance. So once it comes to us, then the freedom of information, nobody ever knows about it. If you're ever under pressure, would seek legal advice in relation to this, and we would have to do the same. So as I was saying, the protection of STR information is essential. So it's never disclosed. So any freedom of information request, it's exempt from. And even when it gets to the courts, if we were pushed, we would be seeking legal advice, and we would be of the opinion that we would rather let something fall than disclose STR information. So it's massively important to protect, because the system falls down in relation to it. So they're not subject from our side to any sort of freedom of information. It's protected. It's similar to Garda intelligence. So if you do a freedom request information to the guards, you can get a lot of information in relation to incidents held and things like that, but you will never get the intelligence side of it. So it's similar to STRs. It's intelligence. It's not a crime. It's suspicion. So that's kind of covered in your GDPR Article 6, I think, covers it in relation to the legal requirement to comply with the designated person's responsibilities under the Act.
Great. Thank you. As accountants, can we check to see if an STR report is made in relation to a client of ours?
Can you check with us if it's been made already?
Yes, that's one of the questions.
No, we would never disclose the presence of an STR to somebody else. Now, where we would is if it's a competent authority. So the likes yourselves or somebody else, look, we discuss information, but we never disclose the processes of that. You know, and it shouldn't form your suspicion. Adverse media attention definitely can form your suspicion. So if somebody's involved in the criminal justice system and you've seen that definitely raises a suspicion. But we would never disclose the presence to anybody. Even with law enforcement, as Caroline said, when the guards come in and say, are there any STRs on this person, we check and see why they're asking. If it's the purpose of asking, it has to be related to money laundering or terrorist finance specifically. So, for example, if there's a murder and somebody comes in and says, do you have any STRs? We say, none of your business. And that's how tight it is. So, and Caroline's the best at saying none of your business to everybody. So,
okay. Happy with that, Robbie? Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, STRs are tightly controlled in revenue, you know, with access to them, and they're never disclosed as part of an investigation compliance activity.
Okay.
I echo everything Stephen said there. That applies to revenue as well, yeah.
Grand. So this one is, if an STR is filed, do both revenue and Garda have access to it, or does the report have to be submitted to each of them separately? So I think the answer to that is the report has to be submitted to each of them separately, as we've discussed. It's a dual reporting requirement, so that's that one. Then the next one, it was mentioned that an agent can make an STR report on behalf of a client. However, this may risk tipping off to the client if the client is the subject of the report, question mark.
Sorry, Lillian, I'm not sure whether you can hear me.
Yeah.
I can't get my video up. It's Tony. Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
yes, Tony. Yeah. We can hear you okay, Tony.
Yeah, it was mentioned that an agent can make an STR report on behalf of the client. However, this may risk tipping off the client if the client is subject of the report. That the agent can actually make an STR report on in respect of a client. I'm presuming that's what the question is.
Yes, well, it's an agent making an STR on behalf of a client.
Well, the client is, it looks here like the client is possibly the subject of the report.
Yes.
So in that case, like the agent can make an STR report on behalf of the client. However, I would say if the client is the subject of the report, that the agent register for STR reporting and use their own STR login to actually report the client, not use the client's account.
Yeah, right. So go through the procedure of, I think that Robbie went through that, where there's the separate one. So that needs to be it needs to be registered separately. They need to be registered separately.
Yeah. If I can explain, company A is the agent on behalf of company B. Now, company A has an STR that they want to report, of which company B is included. Company A should generate their own STR registration, if not already, with revenue and FIU GoAML, and make that STR report. So company A is making the STR report in regards to company B, not on behalf of, because company B are the subject.
Okay, I think that's fine. Thanks, Tony, for that. The next one then is if an accountant makes an STR, would he have submitted the tax return? I mean, there's more to making an STR than just a tax return. Would that be fair to say?
Will they be completely separate, Lillian? You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't really understand what they're asking. Like they could be making, yeah, if they are their agent, they will be putting in tax returns for them. But STRs are completely separate to their tax returns.
But then arising out of a tax return, there might be an STR. Would that be fair to say or not? Or is that something you come across?
No.
No. Okay.
No. We would look at the tax return because of an STR that came in, but
right,
we would not vice versa.
Right. Okay. Grand. So thank you. Read the STRs and perhaps never. This is a question about STRs and perhaps never sending one on. I presume this is somebody who thinks that they might have to do one. Is this just based on thresholds, or would it include names, accounts, and other identifiers? Like a pattern might emerge despite amounts always being on or below a threshold. I understand the FIU doesn't do analysis. I think
I can say there, Lillian, both Caroline and Robbie mentioned it. The STR is driven by suspicion. It can be any amount of money or any amount of action in relation to a transaction.
Yeah, in relation to that as well, the FIU definitely do analyse. We're actually one of the only FIUs that we get eyes on every single STR. So it's important to note that we do analysis on it.
Right. Okay. Is the STR report the same for both submitting to Revenue and Guards? The form the same for submitting to both institutions? Well, I think that's been covered. I mean, there's two separate processes.
Can we just jump in there as well?
Yeah.
And it's the second time already in this question session that the Guards have been referenced. Reporting to the FIU is not, and I want to be crystal clear, not reporting to the Guards. Because for whatever reason, if we deem that STRs doesn't reach our analysis threshold for dissemination, or if we think it can't be disseminated without protecting the STR, it will never reach the Guards. So you can't, if you think the Guards need to know something, that's your Section 19 obligation or your 59, but your STR is not reporting it to the Guards. Your STR obligation is to FIU Ireland and Revenue. That's it. So you can't, it has to be a very clear distinction. And that's why I said, if you do report to the Guards and it has done a different way, if you need to say it in the STR. And we can get bogged down in everybody looking for, specifics in relation to reporting. And we talk about tax returns there and things like that. the legislation kind of states a couple of things. It's where you have the reasonable suspicion you spoke about, but there's also an obligation to scrutinise that information. Okay, and where specifically for this industry, you're the experts in this industry, and it's how the whole compliance structure fits together. If your customer due diligence is good, if your KYC is good, and you know what to expect from that client, you're much more easily able to identify suspicion because you know, well, that's not in line with what I would expect to see. And that's where your suspicion comes from. Whereas if you haven't done that, or you don't know your client that well, or you're not sure, that becomes much harder to do. And you are the expert in this area in relation to what would be suspicious. So as an investigator, if I was in an investigative unit in the Guards, it might be much harder for me to understand, why is that happening? Why is this? Whereas something might be second nature to you, and you can look at it and say, that's okay. And then all of a sudden, the question is, why are they doing that? And then it comes to, well, what do I need to know? That's my grounding for suspicion. I'll have a little bit look into it. What else is there that can support this suspicion? You've scrutinized the information. Then it's like, name of the person involved, all their information you have. If there are any funds in relation to that you suspect are the subject of money laundering, you need to identify where they are, or state in the STR if you know that the transaction is this and that, and that you know where the funds are. So it comes down to your expertise and knowledge. And unfortunately, neither Revenue nor FIU Ireland can really say to you A, B, C, and you can say things where, like Robbie covered great points and Caroline covered great points in relation to, you know, certain transactions look suspicious, the use of, you know, minor accounts, the use of different withdrawing of funds all over the country, or large money not being in line with the activity on an account. As an accountant, you are the one who decides what I normally see and what I don't see. And the better you know your customer, the better you can identify that sort of suspicion then.
Very helpful, Stephen. Thank you. There was one there about there's one about an agent can make an STO report on behalf of the client. Oh, sorry, that's the tipping off one. There was one about a follow-up. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it here. It said that if, sorry, let me find it. Oh yeah, does the person who files an STO receive any updates about what happens afterwards, so they will have an understanding if their reporting was appropriate and helpful?
Okay, Caroline kind of covered this, and it's one quirk of the legislation. I think, as far as I can remember, that the legislation, I think it's subsection 11 of that part of the Act, says FIU Ireland. So I think Revenue get a pass in this. I don't know. But it says FIU Ireland, where practicable, should respond with feedback. As we explained, it's very difficult to do. What I would state is, with the numbers we've seen, if you've put a lot of effort into an STR, there's no harm in reaching out to us via the message board and saying, look, can you give me some feedback on that? Now, that won't work if it's every single STR. If you're submitting STR every week and you say, can you give us feedback? That won't work. We are working on a system, and Caroline touched on it in relation to our new system. We're looking on changing the individual web reports per sector, say. So the accountants would see a different web report to the others. And one part we are looking at is an automatic feedback scenario where, if we disseminate the matter to law enforcement or to anybody else, that you automatically get notified. So you will get a yes, that was disseminated, at least you would know. What I would say is, reach out to us and we will give it to you. And the feedback is high level. The joint practices group Cameron was talking about, we'll give that. But if you've done an STR, or if it's the first time, or if you're really unsure, don't be afraid to pick up the phone. And we often do that, and it will help. Not all STRs are equal. Some STRs are very, very easy to do. You will see it, this is clearly suspicious, I'm sending it on, and then it's up to them. But sometimes you might put weeks of work into an STR, and there's no harm in sending us an email or sending us a message on the message board saying, I've submitted this STR, is trying to do it. Specifically, if you're looking at follow-up STRs, or you're still unsure about the suspicions around this person and you still have a business relationship with them. So it's not done as a matter of course, but reach out to us and we'll do it. And hopefully in the future, we will have a little bit more of a streamlined feedback service.
And then the point, the accountant making the STR were to file the tax return suspecting that the return was, so this person, the person who was asking about the tax return, Niamh, was saying that the accountant making the STR would have filed the tax return suspecting that the tax return was incorrect?
Yeah, well, if the STR came in then on that account, we would look into the accounts then when they hit.
Yeah, okay. Agent, it's tipping off. Okay, there's one there. I don't know if anybody wants to. Do you ever see a business that may be a front?
Yeah, we see business all the time there, fronts. It's one of the main money laundering typologies. And we had one business that led to a massive money laundering ring. And the only real reason it was caught, it was a cash-based business. And we're always wary of, a cash-based business is a red flag in relation to why is it a cash-based business. So we had one that was a beauty salon. And in normal times it would be fine to look at, but the beauty salon was showing the same figures all the way through the COVID lockdown. So same cash, same money going through it, and the business should have been shut. So cash-based businesses, but that probably would have flown under the radar because it wasn't huge amounts of money. It would be in line with what that would be expected. But the fact that it was closed, so it's always, if it piques your interest and you're not sure, if you have questions in relation to is this business actually legitimate, then that's when you start scrutinize things. Even as simple as a, open online check to see what it is, see if there's any reviews, have a look at Google Street Maps to see where this is based. Is there actually a shop front in it? Things like that. We had a case from the UK. I was talking to one of my colleagues, and they had a drug dealer who was basically selling drugs, but he for all intents and purposes, it looked like a fruit and veg shop. He was using card payments and everything. You could pay by your drugs with card, but it looked like a fruit and veg shop, and the monies involved weren't that different. It just happened to be that he was selling drugs. So there's little bits like that. And then it gets to the point where it's piqued your suspicion. We're not expecting you to go down a rabbit hole. A few little things like that and think, look, this is just out of the ordinary. I've done my little bit. Then you're submitting your STR. And revenue will say, okay, is this a cash-based business where they're avoiding, tax or whatever, or they're due to pay, they have a revenue bill. And we might look at it and say, is it legitimate money or not? If it's not legitimate, it's a money laundering and we're going to criminal. And that's where us and revenue work very well together. So we might say to them, look, we're actually looking at these lads for money laundering, or we're looking down a criminal investigative route, and revenue will kind of support us and hold off maybe before going to them in relation to establish if it's legitimate income.
Right.
Gabriel, I see here your question: in the unlikely event you're subject to audit following a client activity, if you can show a file an STR, does it help in your defence? Don't think that's one really for the panel here. I mean, I think that will be, you're talking about a regulatory matter with your institute. So I think that one is I can take that one offline, Gabriel, and come back to you. Or I know it may be ACCA as well, so I'll deal with that one later. And then the other one I think we've dealt with, that you have just reporting the issue. So we've covered that. I think that. Sorry, there was one other one here. I'll just read it out. It's kind of long. There is a perception in some parts of the accounting profession or the wider financial industry that making regulatory reports can be ineffective due to sheer volume of reports versus resources available. A view being expressed more open recently since the CSO decision to stop recording crime statistics due to a backlog of unrecorded Section 19 reports. What's the FIU revenue response to this that we can use to combat perception? I mean, I think you have to keep on plugging away at your reporting if you come across a suspicious transaction. Anybody like to comment on that one?
Yeah, you've a legal obligation to do it,
Yeah.
and like it's very frustrating, and I get that, and everyone gets that. That sometimes you can put a lot of work into this, and it might feel like it goes into a black hole, but unfortunately, there's a legal obligation there, and there's no way around it. Again, it's the point in case there of the guards and the FIU. That Section 19 thing is to do with how it was structured. Originally, it was structured that they were sent to individual stations, and then it was brought centrally. So a lot of those Section 19s may have been STRs as well, and we would touch base with them as well. But I can get that, and that's what I'm saying, especially in relation to feedback. If you're putting work into it and you're not getting any feedback, it can feel like it goes into a black hole. I can assure you it doesn't. And what I will say is we do an analysis on all of this, and Niamh, Robbie and Tony will say the same, is sometimes you might flag something as a suspicion and it doesn't particularly, you'd never hear back. We send it to the guards and the guards take it, but to protect the STR, it has to disappear. So the guards start an investigation. But I've firsthand seen what STR information could do, and there are real people and real victims behind this information. So it's not a flippant thing. It's not something that doesn't make a difference. And the point I made earlier on in relation to specifically for your sector, your gatekeepers. So if you get it wrong, or if you don't take it seriously, it can have a massive knock-on effect to adding that air of legitimacy to a criminal enterprise, and a sophisticated criminal enterprise, and we have seen that where, it might not be done properly, or it might be a solicitor, it might be an accountant, it might be somebody, and it makes it so much harder when you get that information, or that you get those transactions coming through a professional body, and you think, well, surely they would have caught it, and that might not always be the case. So while I do accept that it's hard and it's really difficult and it's hard not to see it going, is reach out to us. We'll give you feedback if we can. If you've done the report and you want to know, send us a message and we'll see if we can get back to you. But don't lose sight of the fact that it does actually make a difference.
Thank you. Great. And then I think the only one here, the last one here, how do you track STRs that have been submitted to revenue but not FIU, or vice versa? Well, I mean, it has to be submitted to both, or else it's not a valid notification. So you haven't fulfilled your legal obligation. So I'd say that in the first instance. Is there any tracking after that, or how in practice, how does that work to FIU?
I think the question there is, Lillian, someone asking, they want confirmation of the STRs that they submitted. In Revenue's case, an agent will receive a confirmation message. They'll receive 2 confirmation messages from Revenue, and it'll give the STR entity reference number that the agent used. This goes into the Ross message inbox. Now they're available, their messages are available to download for 7 days after they're received. If, however, it is a case at the end of the year and an agent does wish to track STRs, how many they submitted to Revenue, they can send us an email there, and we will try and oblige. We will only give the entity reference numbers plus a total of the STRs. There's no way identifying information given.
Okay, so I think that you have to make a complete one, you have to make a dual one, and you'll get and Caroline and Stephen, do you get a reference if you get it completed? Do you get a notification back that it's completed and you've sent it in? Yeah.
And then we have the meetings that Caroline and Robbie were talking about. We meet bi-monthly, so and that's what we would discuss. Revenue might say, well, we're looking at this, and we'll say, okay, we have these couple that are really high profile. We want to make sure the criminal investigation that they're not tipped off, that the criminal investigation is underway. So we work very closely together, and we pick up the phone, we talk to each other. So you need your confirmation. You get both confirmation with both, but then we will discuss between ourselves, the 2 entities, to say, well, what are we doing with this, or what are we doing with that? And we both look at it. So
okay, I think that's all of the questions there on both the chat and the Q&A. So it just remains for me, unless anybody has anything else to say, just remains for me to thank everybody for their participation this morning, and very interesting. And so the message really is, get registered, get up and running, and make those STRs if you need to. And there's help out there if you need some help with registering, and we have all those resources. And I'd just like to thank in particular Chris O'Donoghue for his cool, calm, and running the technology side of things. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Lillian. Thanks, everyone.
thank you.